Welcome. This is going to be a recording on tips for activity 1. So there will be a separate video that shows you how to complete activity 1. The purpose of this video is to show you the different tips that will help you with the data normalization process that you have to do for activity 1. So I'm looking at the January 2022 paper and I am going to read the scenario. You have been asked to create a database for Washington College. The college offers a range of subjects from level 1 to level 3, for example BTEC Information Technology at level 3. The database will record information about students, subjects, classes. Students are enrolled into classes. There can be up to 20 students enrolled into a class. A class is for a subject. A subject may be taught in more than one class. Each student has an email address that is made up of, and then it tells you the format of the email address and gives you an example to show you what that will look like. So the first tip I want to offer here is finding the correct tables required for the data normalization process. This is the table that you're presented with for activity 1, the figure 1 table. This is an example of a flat file database, and they want you to transform this flat file database into a relational database. So the idea is we want to turn this one table into 4 different tables. Usually 99% of the time or 95% of the time you will need a 4-table solution. So what we are trying to do is how can we split this table into 4 tables to the point that each table has information that belongs only in that table. So what you'd do on activity 1 is you would copy this table, which I'll do quickly. So I'll name it figure 1. Now it's a good habit to get into the habit of using naming conventions when you're creating your tables. On your mark scheme they like to see TBL. Now the fastest way for me, which I found to copy data, is instead of doing row by row, I like to do column by column. In my experience this has been much faster. So I'm going to do one column and then I'll pause the video and complete the rest of the table. So we always start in design view where we copy the name of the fields or the columns and select the correct data type based on the data inside of the field. So student first name, contains short text. So I'll change this from auto number to short text. Now make sure whenever you're creating your figure 1 table, the first table where you copy the data from the exam paper, make sure that you disable primary key. If you don't, you will not be able to copy the data because you will have duplicates. So the next column name is class ID. The data in that column is number, so I select number. The next one is class start date. What data type have they used? They've used date, so I change this to date or date and time. The next one is subject title. What data type have they used? They've used short text. I think you get the idea. So I'm going to pause the video here, copy the data, and then we'll resume with the tips for completing activity 1. Okay, so back where we left off, I finished copying out the data. So remember, when you're copying out the data, never close the table until you have completed copying your data, because if you were to do that and then reopen the table like I've done here it changes the order. So if you're not sure if you've copied out the data right, you will not be able to know. For example, if I go to this column here, it's James Lewis. However, here it's showing James Lewis Taylor. Doesn't mean the data I copied out is wrong. That's what happens. It sorts your data once you close the table and reopen the table. So make sure when you're copying out figure 1, you only close the table once you have completed copying out the data that's within the table. So we can resume with the video. So remember, this is not necessarily how to complete activity 1. It's tips for activity 1. And the main tip we're trying to look at here is how can we find the 4 tables required. So the first thing we always go by is every field name that has ID in the name requires its own table. So in this case, we've got class ID, we've got student ID, and we've got subject ID. So we've got 3 tables already. So the only challenge is to find what the 4th table is. So I'll create those 3 tables. So I'll create a table, I'll save the name of the tables using the naming convention TBL. I'll start off with subject, then I'll go to class, and then the last one is student. There we go. So here's the big tip, guys. There's always going to be 4 tables 90% of the time. There's always going to be 3 tables that contain information that only belongs in that table. Then there's always going to be 1 table, which I'm going to call a conjunction table, that joins everything together. That's going to join the data in the 3 other tables together. So here we're trying to join everything together. So we're trying to join everything together, the class, the student, and the subject ID. So I'm going to go back to this scenario, because usually when you go back to this scenario, it will give you a clue as to what that table needs to do that's going to join everything up together. So here they've told us the database to record information about. These are the 3 tables that ended with the name ID. So the database will record information about students. We've got student ID table. It will record information about subjects. We've already got subject ID. It will record information about classes. We've already got the class table over here. Then we move on to here. Students are enrolled into classes. This is the 4th table because we don't have that table yet. The class table should tell us information about, this is the class, this is the class start date, and then this is the subject being delivered for the class. The subject table tells us this is the subject title, this is the subject level. That's it. And obviously the student table just tells us information about students. We don't actually have a table where we enroll a student to a class. That's what it says here. Students are enrolled into classes. So that's what our 4th table needs to do. So to enroll a student into a class, we need the foreign key, which will be class ID. So if we want to enroll James onto maths, we need the foreign key, which is class ID number 1. If we want to enroll a student, we need the foreign key, which is the student ID. So that's our 4th table. So TBL, I'll call this enrollment or enrolled. That's our 4th table. I go into design view and I'll have class ID, because to enroll a student into a class, I need the class ID, which will retrieve the information from the class table. To enroll a student, I need a student ID, which will be able to retrieve the student's details from the student table. And I need to make sure the data type is matching. So I'll go to my figure 1 table. So class ID, I used number. Student ID, I used number. Now on this table here, I don't want to have a primary key. So if you understand how primary keys work, you understand this table cannot have a primary key. If you made class ID the primary key, what that would mean is you can only enroll one student into a class, because once you put class ID 1, if you try to repeat class ID 1 again, how primary keys work, you can't have duplicate values. So that's one reason why we can't have primary key for class ID in this table, because it clearly states here up to 20 students can be enrolled into a class. So the table needs to allow us to enter the number 1 for class ID 1 20 times if we wish to. We also can't have student ID as the primary key, because if we did, it means a student could only take one class, which doesn't work. A student can take different classes for different subjects. That's why, for that reason, this table wouldn't have a primary key. Now, like I said before, this is a video on activity 1 tips. So I'm going to open a different past paper and see how we would figure out the 4 tables required. So we'll go for 2023. Why not? In fact, I don't want to go for that paper. We'll go for 2021, because I like to use that paper for mocks. That's why I'm not going for the 2023. We'll use this paper. So this is the figure 1 table. Now this one, looking from afar, it already tells you what your 4 tables are. Why? Because you've got 4 field names that end with ID: exhibition ID, artist ID, gallery ID, gallery type ID. Those are your 4 tables. Done. We'll open a different past paper where that's not the case, because that's not usually the case. Okay, June 2022. Right, this is more like it. So here, it's not easy to tell what the 4 tables are. It's not easy at all. It's not even easy to tell what the 3 tables are, because there's only 2 field names that end with the name ID. So we're going to work with this example over here. So I'm going to delete this table which I created before, because I don't need them. So I'm just going to copy the field names from the figure 1 table. I'll pause the video and then I'll return once I've copied out all the data. In fact, yeah, I'll do that. Okay, and we are back. So I'm going to open Notepad here. That is not Notepad. There we go. I'll make this so it's not getting in that way. So we're trying to figure out what our 4 tables are. So currently we know 2, because we've got performance, grade ID, which indicates we need a table over there, and then we've got position ID. So we need to figure out what are the 2 tables that are missing over here. So it's always good to read and understand this scenario. This is the scenario. You have been asked to create a database for automatic vending services. Automatic vending services is a company that supplies, installs and manages drinks vending machines for businesses. The database will record information about the staff it employs. There are several job positions in the company, for example a vending machine operator. Each staff member has 1 job position at a time However, they can have many different positions during their employment. Not all staff members work 5 days a week. The minimum number of days they can work is 2. Once a year, each current staff member is given a performance grade. The company does not keep a record of past performance grades. It only keeps the current performance grade. Right. So if we go here, the database will record information about the staff it employs. The staff, not stuff. So that's one of the missing tables. Staff table. Because performance table has nothing to do with recording information about staff. Performance grade ID table has nothing to do with recording information about staff again. So that's our third table. So what's the fourth table? Okay, so that's where we need to keep reading here. So here, there are several job roles in the company, which will be stored in the position table. So each staff member has one job position at a time. Okay, so now we'll go to the table. And we can create table by table and figure out what our fourth table is going to be. So the first table is the staff table. So we go to create. Staff. And in the design view, I'm trying to look at the field names that belong to the staff table. So I'm only looking for field names that pertain to details about a staff member. Okay, so we've got a staff reference. This is a number, and we're going to keep that as the primary key. We need to know their surname, and that's short text. Grade, staff. Okay, we also need to know their telephone number. Okay, that's it for this table for staff. We move on to the next table. So we're going to do position. You remember? We've done staff, now we're doing position, then we'll do performance grade after. So we go to design view. So we've got position ID obviously. And this is a number. It needs to be a primary key so we don't have duplicate positions. So the only thing that indicates a position, we've got position ID, then you've got the name of the position, which is called position, and this is short text. That's our second table. Our third table will be performance grade. So TBL performance. We go to design view. So we know we've got performance grade ID, which I want to say is a number because it is a number. We need that as a primary key so we don't duplicate. So what's the purpose of performance grade ID? So performance grade ID, it's a descriptor. So they told us on this scenario that staff would have their performance reviewed and they would be assigned a grade. So you can clearly see if a staff member was assigned the performance grade of 1, it means this was excellent. If it was 2, it means it was good. If it was 3, it means it was average. So that's all we're going to have in this table. Grade descriptor, and that is short text. So if you remember the previous example, I said you always have 4 tables 90% of the time. Then you have one table that tries to join everything together. So the last table that we need here is a table that does what they said in the scenario, which we don't actually have. So each staff member has one job position at a time. They can have many different job positions during their employment. Yeah. So once a year, each current staff member is given a performance grade. The company does not keep a record of past performance grades. So we need the table that now records this information, that records the staff member was working this position and this is the performance grade that they were given. At the moment we don't actually have that table. Performance table just tells us information about the different grades that we can assign when we're reviewing performance. Staff table just tells us information about the staff. And obviously the position table just tells us about the different job roles that there are in the company. So the different job roles that we have, we've got manager, vending machine operator and so forth. So that's our last table. So not quite sure what you'd call this table, but we'll go for it. So create table, TBL, we'll call it performance review. Okay, so what would we need in this table? So the first thing we'll need in this table is the staff reference. So if we want to review the performance of a staff member, we need the staff reference. If we want to assign what the performance grade was, we need the performance grade ID, which is the foreign key. A foreign key is the primary key of another table. Performance grade is also a number. We also need to know what position they were employed in for the performance that we are grading. So we need position ID. Position ID is a number. We need to know when did they start the position and when did they finish a position. So we need position start date and position end date, and these are date and time. Okay, so that's all you'd need in this table. Now, why you wouldn't put position start date and position end date in the position table? Because the purpose of the position table is to just indicate the different job roles. If you put start date and end date, it's kind of you're trying to indicate that a manager position only lasted for a certain time period. Position start date and end date, they're there for us to indicate when a staff member was operating in that position. It doesn't belong in the position table. The purpose of the position table is to tell us this is the position ID, and for each position ID this is the name of the job role. That's the purpose of that table. Performance review table, we get the staff reference, the performance grade, what position, the start date and the end date, and that would be our 4 tables. So there's some tips. I hope they help you to know what 4 tables you should have in the end. I hope you found it useful, and then you can then find the other video that actually shows you how to complete activity 1. So this was just a video on tips for activity 1. On how to complete activity 1, you need to watch the other video. I think staff table, there are some things that we left out here. Yes, we did. So we left out staff days per week, then staff start date and staff leaving date. Staff start date, oops, and staff leaving date. Okay, I'll catch you on the next video. I'll just change this to date, I'll change this to number, and change this to date and time. Okay, thank you.